Would you like to take some time off from work? Maybe a few days, maybe several days. Take part in a real reality show. You won't have to sweat, sleep in a tent, or eat weird foods. All you have to do is sit in judgment of your fellow man. We'll talk about jury duty right now on The Law Works.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Closed captioning for The Law Works is made possible by a grant from the Monongalia County Bar Association and by the Deitzler Family Foundation. People helping people.
The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the West Virginia Association for Justice, and by ALPS, providing protection and peace of mind for West Virginia attorneys and their clients since 1988.
One of the most frequent questions a lawyer hears from friends and acquaintances is, how can I get out of jury duty? My guests are Judges Robert B. Stone and Russell M. Clauges, Jr. Judge Stone, thank you for coming. Your senior status, which is kind of retired, you don't have to do things like this anymore.
That's okay. Thank you for having us here to discuss this really important subject.
Well, thank you. This actually came from a suggestion by Judge Clauges to talk about the civic duty of jury duty. Where does it come from, Judge Clauges?
Well, it comes basically from the fact that our system of justice is based upon the jury system. Parties to litigation in criminal cases are entitled through the Constitution to a jury trial. Most civil litigants are entitled to a jury trial, and if the parties are going to have a jury trial, well, then we have to have a jury.
One follows the other, I guess.
Logically, yes.
People, I don't know if they're afraid of jury duty, if they're shy of being on a jury, but it seems like an awful lot of people don't want to do it. What do you say to them?
Well, as you introduced the show, you asked the question, how can I get out of jury duty? And I couldn't help thinking that that's really the wrong question to ask. And the better question would be, what is involved with jury duty? How long am I going to have to serve? What kind of an impact might it have on my life? Because it does impact your life if you're going to serve jury duty. But because it's inherent in our system of justice, in our judicial system, it doesn't work. It doesn't survive without willing jurors. So, you know, if anything, I would hope that if this show can accomplish something, it may be to encourage individuals who are summoned for jury service to ask the question or to spur them to find out what's involved before they say, how can I get out of it?
Well, how would they do that? What is involved in jury duty?
Okay. Well, that's a broad question and can take a long time to answer and try to
we got about
try to
half
narrow
an hour.
try to narrow it down though a little bit to a working answer. Once you are on a list or a panel of jurors, we have a jury answering service. It's very easy to use. Call in a number and find out if you're supposed to come in the next day for a trial. If your name's on that list, it'll tell you where to report and when. If there are no jury trials, it's a short message. It says there aren't any jury trials. Call back whenever you're supposed to call back.
So you get on that list, you receive something in the mail that says you're being summoned for jury duty.
Yeah, and that's usually the impetus for the phone call, because the summons indicates to people that they are on jury duty for the next, say, 5 weeks. And so
five? I don't have that kind of time.
and that's usually the call that we get. I can't be there every day for the next 5 weeks, and as a practical matter, that's not the case. I mean, that may be a juror's term of service, but practically speaking, there are not jury trials, or there will not be jury trials each day of that 5-week period of time, either in the circuit courts or in magistrate court, where there could be jury trials. Secondly, we try to have up to 125 people on that list, so chances are, even if there's a jury trial, you're not going to be called that day. You're not going to be called every day to serve.
So when you say called to serve, you don't make a phone call to them.
No.
You ask them to call in and find out if their name has been
Right. Their name is on the list.
called to the altar, or as it were. You're going to have to come in.
And I'm actually exploring whether or not I would like to be able to put that list on a computer so people that can check a website or something to do it.
Now, both of you served as judges in the Circuit Court of Monongalia County.
Right.
Do other courts in West Virginia use the same basic system that you used in Monongalia County?
I think the answer to that would be yes. The law that the legislature passed some 20, 25 years ago requires a random jury selection process. Most counties use voters registration or driver's license list obtained from the Division of Motor Vehicles for their particular county, or a combination of those lists. And then from those lists, they're placed on a computer, and the computer helps select from a random beginning point potential jurors from that master jury list, if you will. So yeah, I think really all of the counties use some variation of that same procedure.
So in your county at least, I would call in knowing that my name is on this master list now. It's been selected to be on a jury.
From the master list for a particular period of like 5 weeks, we pick 125. The master list is thousands of names.
Yeah.
Now we pick maybe 125 that the computer kicks out. Those are the ones that receive the notice in the mail, the summons. So we're dealing with a much smaller group.
And actually what we do nowadays, to get the 125 that I made reference to, we may send out 250 summons.
Why do you have to send out twice as many summonses as you need people? You
A
get a
lot of
summons, you're
reasons.
supposed to show up.
Yeah, well, a lot of reasons. We get a lot of them returned. Monongalia County is a pretty fluid community. A lot of people come, a lot of people go, so we get a lot of them returned because the addresses are bad or that. And then with a lot of the others, there are statutory reasons for being disqualified or excused from jury service. And so by the time we process all of those, we go from the 250 initial letters that we sent out, or summons, if you will, down to around 125.
Well, these different factors that might disqualify somebody, such as a physical limitation, if you have vision or hearing problems, you may ask to be excused. If you're over a certain age, you may ask to be excused.
Yes.
How do you find out if they are? Do you send a questionnaire out?
Yeah, with the summons is a questionnaire. And the questionnaire contains what I consider to be the qualifying questions. And those are the questions that if people answer those questions a certain way, then they're disqualified from jury service. Currently, if you are 70 years of age or older and elect not to serve on jury duty, that's your right. You check a box and you're off. You made reference to, say, a physical or another disability. You know, certainly it's not our intention to exclude people with disabilities from jury service, so we ask the question for two reasons. One, to find out if that disability prevents them from being able to serve, and if that's the case, they provide a doctor's excuse indicating that, or to determine whether or not they have a disability that we can accommodate. Just like anybody else, we're a public accommodation, so we have to accommodate disabilities to the extent that it's possible.
So just because I'm restricted to a wheelchair or I have limited vision or limited hearing is not an automatic disqualifier?
Not an automatic disqualifier, and in fact, if you have those conditions and want to serve, then it's our responsibility to make it possible for you to serve.
For example, providing an interpreter, a sign language for the deaf. That's required by law now and is not too difficult to accomplish.
So you have an opportunity to have a real cross-section of the community.
That's the goal. I mean, that's the whole idea, is to have a real cross-section of the community without taking out various groups of people. And you know, oftentimes when we get the letter or the call that says, you know, I can't be there for the next 5 weeks, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a you know, I'm a plumber, I'm self-employed, I do this, I do that, or I do the other thing. You know, if we automatically excluded everybody that fit into certain categories, then we've prevented ourselves from having a fair cross-section of the community. And, you know, one of the things we like to suggest is if you were a litigant, if you were a participant in a trial, wouldn't you like people like you on the jury? You know, if you were a doctor and you were sued, wouldn't you like to have the, you know, possibly other doctors on the jury panel? That's a fair question to me.
I suppose it depends on how solid your case is or what your position is in the case. I might want somebody who can't possibly understand what's going on.
You might, and by the time we get to trial, the lawyers have their idea of what kind of a jury they're looking for, and that's all part of the process of selecting a jury. But that's after we get to trial. We still want to bring in a good cross-section of the community.
You probably hear all kinds of stories. Well, I guess first we need to specify that you're the guys who decide if the juror doesn't have to come in. The judge of the court is the one who says, okay, you're excused from jury duty if you have a good enough reason to be excused, or you're not. What kind of creative stories, excuses do you hear about people wanting not to come in? You giggle.
Well, the one that comes to my mind is how often we get a letter from an employer saying, my employee can't serve. My employee is needed and I'm not going to be able to survive in my business without the employee. Well, we never accept those. We want to hear it from the employee. We want to hear it from the person who's been summoned in as a juror. And many times the employee says, that's crazy. You know, they don't need me. They can get by. I really would like to serve. Well, you know what decision we make when we hear that. We don't excuse it.
If I was the employee, I'd want a copy of that letter from my boss the next time the pay's being discussed.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's always very interesting when you get that letter from a big box store, you know, like a Walmart or a department store, saying that this employee is so essential that I can't let him come and serve on a jury.
Actually, many years ago, I had a secretary who was summoned to be a juror, Judge Stone, in your courtroom, and it was the best thing that ever happened, because I got a real insight, not during the trial, because she was very, very rigorous about not discussing the case with me during the trial, but the day the case was over, she said, this is what happened, this is what I thought, this is how it worked. And it was very beneficial to me, because it gave me a little insight into how those things work.
Well, it might be interesting for the folks to know that Judge Klodges served as a juror in one of my cases.
Did.
So he was not excused, nor was he struck by the jurors.
Yeah.
So what did you think of the judge in that case?
Well, he did a great job. I was a little shocked at the litigants because they left me on the jury panel. And actually, that was a situation where I had to basically stand true to my principles, because I do make it very difficult for people to get excused entirely from jury service. Now, we do make accommodations, and we do reduce service and things of that nature. So when I showed up on jury duty, and I mean, let's face it, I'd lived in Monongalia County all my life, and I'd never been selected for jury duty until I'd been on the bench about 7 or 8 years.
You were a judge when this happened?
I was a judge when this happened. And so I didn't
That's
excuse,
what I meant when
I
I
did
was-
not excuse myself from jury duty. And of course, 1 week of the period of time we were at conference, so I knew I wouldn't get called that week because there wouldn't be any trials. But
Conference is when judges go away to judge school or judge
That's
discussion or whatever it is.
to get our continuing education, so I figured I was safe that week, and I managed to make it. It was almost, I think it might have been the last week of the term that I actually got called.
Often wondered if he wrote himself a letter asking to be excused. Said, no, I'm not going to excuse that person.
I didn't because I knew it would be a waste of time.
You're tough on these kinds of things.
I try to be. I've unfortunately had several people tell my secretary that they would never vote for me again.
Well, you're still a judge, so.
Yeah, luckily I've been unopposed the last couple of times, so I didn't need those votes.
Well, I hate to give people a guidebook on how to get excused from jury duty, but what are reasonable excuses?
I think a few have been mentioned. My job requires my presence, and maybe healthcare people who provide in-home nursing services, and there's only like 2 or 3 people that go in, and they're one of them. You know, in situations that are unusual and would cause great hardship, there should be an excuse from jury service, and there are excuses giving, and people don't have to serve. But the questions that are often asked by a judge when they receive a request to be excused from jury service is, well, what would happen if you were injured or ill and had to stay home for a week? What would happen to your business or your personal situation or whatever? And sometimes that stops them in their tracks, because that can happen and everybody would survive, and so they see that they can maybe serve after all. 5 weeks is a long time, we recognize that. There aren't very many cases, if any, that I can recall that have gone 5 weeks, for example. Doesn't mean you're going to be in a jury for 5 weeks. It doesn't mean you're going to be in a jury for a week. It may be 2 days during that whole period. So if you have some serious issues, for example, you have planned to attend a conference in California and have paid for it, and you know, have your plane tickets and reservations, well, if that's only for a week or 3 or 4 days, you can be excused for that and serve the other period of time.
Yeah.
And so there's flexibility, and I can tell you, Judge Klodges, since he's been chief judge in Monongalia County, has generally handled the excusing of jurors. Falls to the chief judge. I did it for a while, but the desire is not to excuse people. But I think we're very fair in excusing people for a week or 2, or saying pick a couple of weeks where you can serve, and then if they serve and it's a hardship and they complete that trial, we've been known to say, okay, you did a trial, you don't have to do the rest of your term, and excuse you. So we try to be flexible at the same time firm, if that makes some sense.
Yeah. And it's a policy of trying not to excuse people totally or completely from serving on jury. In fact, sometimes we'll defer service, say, we've got 3 periods of time during each term of court. Well, if you're in the first one, you could be deferred, say, to the second one if that's not a good time frame for you. So we do things like that. We'll reduce service for people that it's a real hardship for, to say 2 weeks, let them pick the 2 weeks. Judge Jones already mentioned, and the most common reasons for excusing people are planned business trips, planned vacations. We don't want to force people not to take their vacation, because spring break falls during times we have juries. So if you're planning on taking spring break, we'll excuse you for that. If you've got scheduled appointments, you know, if you can say, you know, 2 weeks from now I've got a scheduled doctor's appointment, we'll excuse people to attend those. You know, we try to accommodate, and then the biggest thing that I try to emphasize there is, you know, let us know in advance. Don't call us after your name's on the list and say, oh, by the way, I've got a doctor's appointment tomorrow.
Or worse yet, tell us when you're in court after you've been summoned in, you don't raise it. Then saying, well, I got a doctor's appointment this afternoon.
It's sometimes, as you're trying to pick a jury, difficult to get enough people to be on the jury, because in a high-profile case or a case involving well-known people or people who are very much involved in the community, you're trying to get objective jurors, so you can't just casually tell somebody, well, you can go home now that you're here in court. If they've got a good reason for not being there, you need to have a person ready to serve.
Oh, no question, and we always try to call in when we know we have a case. We always try to call in what we believe to be enough jurors, and I guess maybe a little bit of an understanding of the jury selection process would help with that. Is say in a civil trial you need a 6-person jury. Well, to get a 6-person jury, you need 10 qualified jurors. So we're looking at, all right, how many people do I have to bring in to get 10 qualified jurors? In other words, jurors who would be objective and unbiased, don't know the parties, don't know the witnesses, don't know about the case, you know, things like that. You know, how many people do I have to bring in to do that? Well, we generally bring in, you know, 15 to 20 people to try to end up with that 10. And I can tell you that, that from a judge's standpoint, you're not feeling very comfortable when you've got 10 people sitting in the box and you've been sent enough people home that you've only got 1 or 2 left sitting in the courtroom before you can pick that jury, because you're faced with maybe leaving somebody that's a questionable juror on, which you don't want to do, or not being able to try the case because you don't have enough jurors.
What you're describing is the front end of a very complex process. When a jury is picked, it just isn't a matter of naming 6 people in a civil case or 12 people in a criminal case to come sit in the jury box and be jurors. You have to have more people than that come up, because there will then be questions asked of those prospective jurors, and depending upon the answer to the questions, the judge may decide that that juror needs to go home for some reason. It may be that the juror works in the industry that the case is all about and wouldn't, for whatever reason, be able to render a fair decision. Or it may be that the 2 parties, the prosecution and the defense, or the plaintiff and the defense in a civil case, looks at the juror, they look at the juror's background, and through questioning decide they're just not comfortable with that person being there, and they excuse it. Those are preemptory challenges. So you take a panel of 10 jurors, or maybe a few more in a particular type of case, and you winnow it down to 6 in a civil case or 12 in a criminal case. And sometimes that's a long and involved process.
Oh, it's a process that can take an hour. It's a process that can take days. Now, it's more often than not that it takes an hour. And that's one of the things that I tell jurors when they say, I can't be there every day for the next 5 weeks. I tell them, first of all, it's a good chance you won't be called to be there on any given day. Secondly, there's a good chance that if you are called, odds are better than even that you'll get to go home after an hour, because you won't be selected to be on that jury.
Some people get summoned to jury duty 3 or 4 times in their lives. Other people never even know where the courthouse is. They don't get summoned to anything. They don't know about the law at all. How does it happen that somebody gets called in 3 or 4 times?
Well, referring back to the random jury selection process that I told you exists in every court in the state of West Virginia, names are truly selected in a random fashion. Some a little more high-tech with the help of computers, others at other stages, like the final stage in our courtrooms, have the names of those in the courtroom in a little box. Shake the box, clerk reaches in blindly and pulls out the name, but it's in a random fashion. So if you get selected several times over 10 years, you're either, depending on how you look at it, you're either very lucky or very unlucky. And it's just the luck of the draw, I guess, is what I want to say.
The only thing I ever won in my life is the right to be on a jury.
That's right.
That wasn't the prize I was looking for. Jury service is important.
It is. Let me mention one thing that came to mind. The biggest problem I think we have with jurors is after they've been selected and sent the summons, they send in their questionnaire. Now they're waiting and their time comes and they're supposed to call in the jury answering service. We put the names on maybe 15 jurors to bring in for a civil case. And we get there the next day and there's only 10 there.
Yeah.
They just don't come.
Well, I forgot to call in.
Yeah.
Or I meant to call in and I just forgot. So that is a major problem. We have to call them, try to find them, say you're supposed to be in here, and sometimes it simply delays the start of a trial. You just have to wait till you have them. And then sometimes they've gone to work, they're out on the road driving a truck or whatever, and we can't get them, and we've literally had to summons in additional jurors by randomly selecting them, calling them on the phone, trying to track them down and bring them in. So that's a problem. And if your next question is, well, what can you do about that? Judges do issue show cause orders to show cause why you shouldn't be held in contempt of the summons that you had. I can tell you, Judge Klodges and I, that is a last resort. I don't recall maybe once or twice in the 23 years I was judge that I did that. But that is something that we can do and is done across the country, not just in West Virginia.
That's a very genteel way of saying you have them picked up by the sheriff and hauled into court.
Well, they have a date to report in
Yeah.
to show cause why they shouldn't be held in contempt. And we're not talking about, at least I'm not, from my standpoint, talking about going to jail. Would be if you had a contemptible attitude towards it, then you might be paying a small fine, or you might be paying a fine.
Yeah.
But jury duty is important. Many people in the history of our country have died, been severely injured. Just so when you have a case and you go to court, there'll be some people sitting in that jury box to listen to the evidence and decide if you're right or wrong, or if you're innocent or guilty. Judge Russell Clodges, Judge Robert Stone, thank you, gentlemen, for being with us.
You're welcome.
Thank you also for being with us. On behalf of the Law Works, I'm Dan Ringer. Good evening.
If you want to know if you need a lawyer, you can discuss your problems with a lawyer by calling the West Virginia State Bar Helpline, toll-free Tuesday evenings from 6 to 8 at 1-800-642-3617. On the LawWorks webpage at thelawworks.org, you'll find a complete listing of all the LawWorks show topics, information on how to obtain copies of the program, and additional information about this show's topic. You'll also find a list of legal resources that can help answer your legal questions. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future The Law Works show, you can send us email to thelawworks@comcast.net.
The Law Works is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia State Bar, the Mountain State Bar, the West Virginia Association for Justice, and the West Virginia University College of Law. The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the West Virginia Association for Justice, and by ALPS, providing protection and peace of mind for West Virginia attorneys and their clients since 1988.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.